Welcome to At Issue. I'm H. Wayne Wilson, and not on the typical At Issue set in Peoria, but here in Springfield at the House of Representatives. And the reason we're here is to ask a few questions of the Secretary of Transportation for the state of Illinois, Ann Snyder. Secretary, thank you so much for being with us on At Issue.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here today.
Let's give an overview, because you oversee the highways, you oversee aeronautics, you oversee the intermodal transportation, and you also oversee safety. So let's start with safety to begin with. There have been several changes made over the years in terms of, we have seatbelt requirements for backseat now too. We have headlights in the rain was a couple of years ago. We have the cell phone ban, it has to be hands-free. You can hear the legislature in the background. So far there have been 283 deaths on Illinois highways as we tape this. So how effective have these safety changes been?
I think they've been very effective. We are in our fifth year with under 1,000 fatalities on our Illinois roadway system. That's a tremendous accomplishment, but at the Department of Transportation, we think one fatality is one too many. And so our goal is to drive fatalities to zero. And the things that have happened that you mentioned, the seatbelt usage and the cell phone ban, all of those things are helping us towards that goal. The fatalities this year at 283, again, that's 283 too many people dying on our roadway system, but we are running about 20 to 30% below where we were last year at this time in terms of fatalities. And in terms of our safety messaging that we'd really like to make sure that people think about when they get in their car and drive down the road is that, there are a lot of hazards out there, and so you really need to be fully engaged in driving when you get behind the wheel of a vehicle. Don't drive distracted. Make sure your seatbelt's buckled. Right now we've got a Click It or Ticket campaign that we're going to be doing during the Memorial Day weekend, where we're helping local law enforcement to be out there and looking for seatbelt violations and also for drunk driving violations. That's a huge initiative for the agency. And also May is Motorcycle Awareness Month. One thing that we've noticed in our fatality statistics is that motorcycles and motorcyclists, the fatality rate for them have been increasing, and we are troubled by that, and so we are very strongly getting the message out to all motorists that they need to be aware of motorcyclists out on the road.
You mentioned that the death rate is down compared to past years at this point in time. From your personal perspective, has the 70 mile per hour limit on selected interstates impacted the death rate at all?
I think it's too early to tell what impact 70 miles an hour will have on the death rate. I think what's driving our numbers right now is that, unfortunately, we had a very harsh winter, but I think what that led to was people staying home and not getting out as much early in the year. So I think over the next few months, we'll get a better sense as to what impact maybe that 70 mile an hour speed limit will have. Based on the studies that have been done at the federal level, they showed that whenever you increase speeds, that you increase the likelihood of an accident. And when you increase the likelihood of those crashes, you also increase the likelihood that if you're in a crash, you will be unfortunately killed in that crash. So we're watching it very closely, and we take it very seriously. We're happy that we were able to get all of the 70 mile an hour speed limit signs up with that law change back in January. But in terms of safety and the impact on safety, I think the jury's still out.
The Department of Transportation has been in the headlines recently with regard to hiring. A couple of things have happened. Number one, some time ago you were on a task force to look at the transit agencies in the Chicago area that found that there was some influence exerted by the Speaker of the House in suggesting that in particular certain Metra people be hired. The BGA had a report last year. The AP did a report just this spring that showed that approximately half of 45 hires in the Department of Transportation, in fact, were influenced by political clout. Can you respond to those charges?
Well, first, let me say that at the Department of Transportation, we have 5,200 employees. And out of those 5,200 employees, 4,900 of them are considered what is called Rutan covered, which means there can be no political factors included in the hiring decision on those 4,900 people. And we take that very seriously, and we make every effort to make sure that that is the case with those hires. Then we have about 300 people that are considered Rutan exempt, or positions that are considered Rutan exempt, which would allow you to hire more at will. And I think what happened is that after people were hired through the Rutan exempt process, those positions were classified as Rutan exempt by the Department of Central Management Services. When those people started at the agency, their job duties started bleeding into areas that were considered Rutan covered job duties, and when we became aware of that, we took corrective action. We're still in the process of making corrective actions. One of the things we're trying to do is strengthen the job descriptions to make sure it accurately reflects the duties that will be performed by employees, so that when we send those over to be classified as either Rutan covered or Rutan exempt, that it accurately reflects the job that's going to be filled. Another thing that we're doing is we're making sure now that supervisors are following our personnel policy manual by making sure that when they do a person's job evaluation, that it's based on their job description. So I think we're trying to put some controls in place to ensure that what has happened in the past does not happen going forward.
If I hear you correctly, this is a question of definition of what jobs qualify for that and what jobs don't qualify?
Right. I think that it's tied to the Supreme Court decision concerning Rutan. I think that happened in the late 80s. And I think then that there's some definitions around what duties qualify somebody to be a Rutan exempt employee. And so we just have to be really careful as we go forward that those job descriptions accurately reflect what people will be doing when they come to the agency.
There is a suggestion that the resignation on April 30th of your top IDOT assistant in the Chicago area was related to that. Is that true?
It wasn't related to that. He chose to retire, and if there are any other matters, they would have been given over to the Office of Executive Inspector General, and they would be able to answer those questions.
Let's turn to what may be the most difficult discussion, that's funding. You had a rough winter, as you've already alluded to. You asked for, and correct me if I'm wrong, $47 million additional dollars just to catch up with the damage caused to roadways, et cetera, during the winter. Where are you financially speaking and in terms of repairs?
Well, the $47 million supplemental appropriation that we have requested really is to cover the costs that we experienced over the winter. So we had to pay additional money for salt that we had not anticipated paying, because we budget for an average winter, and obviously last winter was not average. We also used 1.5 million gallons of fuel than what we typically use in a winter. And we had additional overtime costs related to our personnel that were out in the field fighting the snow and ice and helping motorists get to their destinations safely over the winter. So the $47 million really is to cover those costs. We've had to move money around within our existing budget to cover those costs, but we're at a point where without that we could be challenged to finish out this fiscal year. So we need appropriation authority to do that. But in terms of repairing the roads, we just introduced our multi-year program in May. The program for the next fiscal year 15, still included about a $1.8 billion budget for making repairs and maintenance to our roadway system in Illinois. That's still a pretty good year. But what we're seeing is with the end of the Governor's Illinois Jobs Now capital program, which was passed in 2009, that's now coming to an end. And the improvements we made as a result of that are in place, but the funding now will drop off because that program has come to an end. So going forward, we're going to be challenged from a funding perspective. There are some issues federally that are also impacting what we can and can't do. The Federal Highway Trust Fund right now is projected to go bankrupt or insolvent by August. And if that happens, then the federal government will start prorating state money back to the states for their work that they're doing. That will not impact us immediately, but if that goes on for about 6 months without any resolution, then we will clearly have issues. And the bigger issue, I think, for us in the long term is the highway Surface Transportation Authorization Bill. It's known as MAP 21 currently. It expires at the end of the federal fiscal year, at the end of September. If that bill runs out without any type of action to reauthorize surface transportation spending or a continuing resolution of the current bill, then at that point all ability of the federal government to reimburse the states shuts off. And the other thing around that is we're taking a very conservative view of our multi-year program for the next 6 years, that after this year, that federal investment will fall off. And what that has done is essentially taken about $150 million per year out of our multi-year program. So that's going to have a significant impact on us. So we're watching that very closely. And then, of course, motor fuel taxes, which are tied to consumption, are declining. And with more fuel-efficient vehicles and alternate fuel vehicles, we're going to be challenged as we go forward to make the necessary improvements to our system.
Is there some way that you can tell us in practical terms what all of this means if we don't get a new capital bill in Illinois, if the federal funding does cease in September? What does that mean to us in terms of the highways of Illinois?
So right now, our system, we measure our system condition at least once every 2 years for our roadways in Illinois. And when I talk about that, that's just on the highway, on the state system. There's 140,000 miles of road in Illinois, and 16,000 miles of that is under the jurisdiction of the state. The rest is under the jurisdiction of local governments, including townships, counties, municipalities. But on the state system, we measure that system, the condition of that system, at least once every 2 years. Right now, our system, our roadways, 88% of our roadways are in acceptable or better condition, and 93% of our bridges are in acceptable or better condition. But based on the multi-year program we just announced, if nothing changes in terms of funding by the end of that program, 68% of our roads will be in acceptable or better condition. So we will see a deterioration on our roadway system. And then also on our bridges, we will not compromise on the bridges because that's a significant safety issue for us. So we still estimate, though, that only 90% of our bridges will be in acceptable or better condition at the end of that program.
You made reference to the motor fuel tax. Right now it's at a flat 19 cents per gallon. That hasn't changed since 1990. There is a coalition called Transportation for Illinois, headed up by Doug Whitley of the Chamber, and they're suggesting that change to a 12% instead of a flat rate, a 12% rate, also suggesting some license fee improvement or increases, and the exemption for ethanol be discontinued. What's your position on that?
Well, I think in terms of looking at motor fuel and motor fuel taxes, I think the governor's been very clear that he's not supportive of anything that would increase the price at the pump. But I do think we need to start the conversation. And so I think what they've introduced and what they're talking about will at least help motivate the elected officials to start that conversation and to begin talking about, how should we fund our transportation system. And really, if you look at the motor fuel tax side of things, it's not a good way to think about supporting our system going forward with the new CAFE standards going to 54 miles per gallon by 2025. The Congressional Budget Office is projecting that we're going to see about a 30% decline in federal motor fuel taxes. That will translate to the same thing at the state level, so we'd see about a 30% decline. Plus, we have a lot more alternative fuel vehicles out there. I think the popularity and the demand for electric vehicles is increasing, and so they wouldn't be impacted at all by anything that happens with the motor fuel. So I think we just really need to take a very close look at our transportation system as a whole and figure out what's the best approach going forward to fund that.
As Secretary, do you have a suggestion for the legislature as to how that funding might change?
Well, we think that's an important policy decision that our elected officials need to make, but what we can do is provide information on what has been going on in other states. And, a lot of other states have been very proactive in addressing their transportation funding needs. The state of Oregon has been piloting a vehicle mile travel tax. The state of Virginia moved to a more sales tax-based approach. I know that there are other states that have moved to a producer type fee on gas. So, there are a lot of different models out there that I think we need to take a close look at and see what's the best fit for Illinois and find out from a policy perspective how they would like to see that going forward.
Let's talk about a couple of local projects in central Illinois. And these are projects that have, you'll excuse the use of the term, lingered for a while.
Yes.
People in Fulton County in particular, but even in Peoria and McDonough County, are looking at Highway 336. Now, I believe Quincy to Macomb is completed.
Yes.
But what is the status? When might these people see some sort of roadway between Macomb and Peoria?
So on 336 right now, we're in the preliminary engineering phase. So we have completed the environmental work. And I think what we've done is looked for independent utility for pieces of that, and what we have to do in a lot of instances is incrementally build these things, because we don't have the $700 million all at once that's needed to build a road like this. And so I think there is a portion of 336 near Peoria that we're working on the design engineering for. So that piece will be one that will move forward as soon as we're able to identify the funding beyond the design engineering phase. And if there is movement towards a capital bill, obviously this is something that's very important that should be a part of that.
Yeah, without a capital bill?
It will be in the priority listing for the agency, and right now a lot of our work is prioritized for system preservation and maintenance, so it's really focused on the existing system and not adding capacity, as we call it, by adding lanes or creating new roadways. So as we're focused on that system preservation and maintenance, and without any type of new funding in the future, I think it will be on the priority list, but it could be a while.
Let's turn to Tazewell and Woodford County and what many residents call the completion of the ring road around Peoria, going off of I-74 up towards Mossville. What's the status of that project?
So that's the Eastern Bypass, and that is also in its early engineering phases, and we're having public hearings about that, and we have money included in our program for the next phase of the engineering for that project. We know it's a very important project. I think the next phase in engineering for that project is about $10 million. We've committed $2.5 million to date. It's something that we're looking at very closely. The good thing is, historically, there has been some disagreements over that road, and I think now there's local consensus around it, and I think that's going to help us as we set priorities. It's difficult for us to prioritize something when the locals can't agree on it. And so now that we have that consensus, there is a coalition there that's supportive of that. I think that's going to help us as we move forward to prioritize funding for the next steps in that process.
But all of this hinges on money from the legislature.
Yes, obviously.
You oversee some airports.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, you just had awards given out, I believe the Wayne A. Downing Peoria Airport just received Airport of the Year.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. We're very proud of the Peoria Airport. There are 3 major cargo airports in Illinois, and the number one is O'Hare International Airport, obviously. Number 2 is Rockford, the Rockford International Airport, and number 3 is the Peoria Airport. And we think it's a very important component of our transportation system in Illinois, but even more importantly, an important part of our freight transportation system in Illinois. And I think a lot of that's tied to what happens in the Peoria economy with Caterpillar and some of those things. So that airport is a really linchpin in our transportation system.
Another airport that does not exist but has been talked about for years and years is the South Suburban Airport. Some people call it the Peatone Airport, what have you. The state continues to buy land in that area, but is there any hope that airport will be built, knowing that so far American and United have said we're happy at O'Hare?
Well, I think there might be a misunderstanding about the market for the South Suburban Airport. I think initially the airport will be serving a great deal of general aviation, cargo, and also it will begin to get into the passenger service arena, but it will serve a different kind of market. And really where we're at with that airport right now is we're going to be developing a business plan. We've done the airport master plan, and the airport master plan does show that there is a need in that area for the types of service that would be provided there. But now I think we're going to drill down even further. We're going to do the business plan. We're going to start identifying those airlines, both cargo and passenger, that might see that as an opportunity for them to enhance their business. And we're excited about that moving forward. We are continuing the purchase of land there, and we're working closely with the Federal Aviation Administration. We just entered into an agreement with them to kick off the airspace study, which is the next step in the environmental processes.
So you don't think that you may end up with a Mid-America airport scenario, and for our audience's benefit, that's the airport that was built on the Illinois side of St. Louis, and to the best of my knowledge is only doing charter service right now.
Yeah, I do not see this airport being in that same situation. I think once this airport is built, based on our demand modeling that was done, there will be demand for service there. And I think that as we develop this business plan, we want to make sure that it's a successful airport. And the legislation that was passed last year actually gave the department the ability to enter into a public-private partnership to build the airport. And I think so. Looking at that demand, I think the private sector really will make the decision whether or not that's a feasible airport to construct.
Central Illinoisans are always interested in high-speed rail because it goes right through McLean County.
Yes.
Where are we in making progress because it was done incrementally? Certain sections were upgraded, and high-speed rail is really going from 79 to 110 miles per hour. So where are we with that?
That's a really exciting project for us. So as you know, we started the 110 mile per hour service about a year and a half ago. And we're really excited about it. That's between Dwight and Pontiac. That's in place. But you're right, this has had to be done incrementally. The way that what we're working on right now is adding additional siding tracks so that trains can pass, and also at the same time we're working on the structures to ensure that there's adequate capacity on the structures that run between Chicago and St. Louis. And the other thing that's really of critical importance, I think, is working on the signaling system to ensure the corridor is safe. And that signaling system is really expected to be installed by the end of 2015. By the end of 2015, we expect that 75% of the corridor will then be at 110 miles per hour. And then we've also identified funding for another section between Joliet and Dwight to get that section up to 110 miles per hour. And part of that's going to be to build a second mainline track there so that trains, the freights and the passenger trains, can coexist on that route without any long delays.
I want to go back to the bridge issue that you talked about earlier, because the average age of a bridge in Illinois is about 40 years, give or take, and typically bridges are designed for a 50-year lifespan. And you mentioned that bridges will take priority in terms of repairs because it is a safety issue. With a 40-year average age, are you concerned about looking 5-10 years from now and not having the funds to take care of those bridges?
Well, it's certainly a concern to us. We make strategic investments in our structures in Illinois. So even though the bridge might have been built 40 years ago, it might have been rehabbed or reconstructed since then. So I think that that's helping to extend the useful life of those structures. But we do keep a very close eye on that. We do regular bridge inspections. The inspection schedule is determined by the Federal Highway Administration. But any bridge that we identify as what's termed structurally deficient, we do those inspections more often. And if we see a structure that potentially could have a hazardous issue related to its structure, we will close the structure or we will post it for a lower weight limit. We will never let anybody knowingly drive over a bridge that is not safe.
One real quick last issue. There are some programs for high school students, and I know in talking to you that you believe that you should start that education with the young people. I think there's a Summer Transportation Institute and Drive for Illinois and programs like that. How important is that to you?
Those things are extremely important to me, and I know they're extremely important to the agency as well. We've got to get our youth engaged and involved in transportation. First as system users, so the Drive for Tomorrow campaign is more about the system users. So what we've done is we've modeled this off a program that was successful in downstate Williamson County, and what we've done is we bring the students in and they really get hands-on experience with some of the hazardous issues that they face when they get behind the wheel of a vehicle, like drunk driving. They get to see the impact of not wearing seat belts. We give them experience in big rig trucks. We put them in the seat of a big rig truck so they can experience the road from the perspective of a semi driver, because a lot of times people don't think about, that semi truck is 80,000 pounds and it takes a great deal of distance for something that big going at a certain speed to slow down and stop. So, we try to give that really hands-on experience to our youth so that when they become drivers and users of our transportation system, that they're cognizant of the hazards out there and they drive more safely. The Summer Transportation Institute is more about bringing people into the transportation industry as potential employees. And what we've done there, one of the unique things about our Summer Transportation Institute, we partner with the Federal Aviation Administration, and we actually give high school students the opportunity to learn how to fly. And we think that's a really neat experience. There's a pilot shortage nationwide, and giving that experience is key.
And that intrigues me. I'll have a conversation with you privately because my dad was a pilot for Transworld for many years. So with that, we say thank you to the Secretary of Transportation for the state of Illinois, Ann Schneider, and we thank you for joining us on At Issue from Springfield, Illinois.